Hello and welcome to Spirit Sherpa, the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. I'm Joshua Radewan, your co-host, here as always with transformational coach, shaman extraordinaire, Kelle. Sparta. What's going on, Kelle?
Oh, well, I just got back from Medellín, Colombia, where my husband and I went for our 10th anniversary. We went with a couple of friends of ours. And today we're going to actually talk about mindset and how your mindset determines your reality. Because have I got a story for you?
Uh-oh.
Well, so, here's the thing, right? We talk about our intentions and our beliefs and everything establishing our reality, right? And when I tell people this story, they're like, "Oh my God, you had a horrible trip." And I'm like, "But I had a great trip. I had fun." Right? And I want to talk about why those two things aren't matching for some people.
I would love to hear
And
this.
and I'm gonna tell you, a pretty bad story about our trip. Um, and then I'm gonna talk about why it wasn't a bad trip for me, and how you don't have to let outside circumstances impact you. Right now, um, so here's the situation. Before we left, my back was bad. Right, my back was really out. Now, heads up, I am having hernia surgery in a week. And I had been trying to get an appointment with my doctor. So we're going to talk some synchronicities in advance first. I had been trying to get it. So I had gone to see a doctor that I did not trust. When somebody tells you that they're going to perform something endoscopically that is a laparoscopic procedure, that's a problem, since endoscopy means it's going down through your throat and laparoscopy means it's going in through the belly. Kind of a big difference, right? I'm like, "No, you can't be my doctor." So I've been trying to find a different doctor. And there's a guy down here in Panama known as Dr. Hernia to the, he probably doesn't know that, but everybody talks about him that way. And we tried to get in with Dr. Hernia, and we were calling in the week before October starts. And they're like, "Oh, we don't have the October schedule yet." I'm like, "Seriously?" So, we're leaving for our trip and we can't get an appointment. And so I got on Facebook that morning, and there was a friend of mine in Virginia who said, "Don't miss Dr. Shannon's podcast." Now, Dr. Shannon in this scenario was Dr. Shannon, last name Shannon. Well, my doctor here in Boquete is Dr. Shannon. That's her first name. And so I'm like, "Okay, my back hurts. I need to go see Dr. Shannon so I can get some meds so that I can enjoy my trip." And so I went to Dr. Shannon that morning, and I had to sit around for like an hour, hour and a half waiting for her, not because she wasn't available, but because there was a specialist in her office using her office for a consultation. And as I'm talking with her, I find out who the specialist is. Turns out he's a hernia surgeon.
Naturally.
Naturally. And the guy who did, some follow-up for one of my friends who had recently had hernia surgery and things like that. So I arranged an appointment with him that day for 2 days after we got back from our trip, and everything went easy. Talk about following synchronicities. Turns out this guy also has his own little place where he does his clinic, where he does his work. State-of-the-art equipment, state-of-the-art everything, and about $1,500 cheaper than having the surgery done at the hospital where the other guy, the Dr. Hernia guy, would have done it, right? So not only was it easier, it also saved me money, right? Because I don't have insurance down here, I'm self-insured. Now, just for the record, in case anybody's curious, this hernia surgery is going to be $3,600, okay? Out of pocket, no insurance. So that's yay, yet another reason why I live in Panama. But not subject to the healthcare system in the US. And I could just walk into my doctor and get the appointment for $20. So anyway, so all of this had happened, and I had my good meds for the trip because I was not certain I was going to be able to get on and stay on the plane because my back was out so bad. So the meds helped. They were great. The place we were staying had a hot tub I was like, great, I'll just hop in that hot tub. It'll release the back. I'll be fine. Right. So, and that in fact did happen. Right. So we went to our first day of the trip, and oddly, I'm like walking around. Now we're in Medellín, and I live at 3,500 feet. Medellin's at 5,500 feet. Okay. And I have what I thought was only cold induced asthma. Turns out not so much. I do actually have asthma. It's a very mild asthma, but slowly over the last few years, my lungs had been closing, and I did not notice because I'm not very active. I spend a lot of my time on the computer. I'm fixing that. But right now, yeah. And so we're walking and we're going slightly uphill, and I'm like, like I can't breathe. And I literally, I would stop and I would hyperventilate. I would be like taking the deepest breaths I could, trying to get enough oxygen into my body to get me back to the point where I felt like I could breathe again. And that was not working. And I finally just sat down on the curb and said, Jeff, I need an inhaler. Can you please go get me one? Which, thankfully, being in a Latin American country, we did not have to have our prescription with us, though he could walk into the pharmacy and pay $5 and get my inhaler. And so we did that, and I was like, oh, you can breathe. Thank you. That's amazing, right? And so, we keep going, and we move on to, we get to a mall that we were going to, which was supposed to have great restaurants and stuff like that. And I'm sweating a lot, and I'm feeling a little dizzy. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down on a bench. And I was like, okay, I'm shortness of breath, sweating a lot. I'm dizzy. These are all indicators. I didn't have the headache or the jaw pain, but often in women, chest pain doesn't even come into it, but those are all symptoms of having a heart attack. And I was like, okay, I once thought that I was having a heart attack about a decade ago. And I'm like, I went to the emergency room, and they said, no, you're having a vasovagal response. If you had laid down flat on the ground and not elevated your head or your feet or anything, just flat for, a few minutes, you would have been fine. And so I did that on the bench. I laid down flat on the bench, and I started to feel better. And then I got up, and I started to have a how when you're about to faint, before you see the tunnel, your vision gets kind of patchy. I was having the patchy, right? And I stuck my head between my knees. And I oddly, for some reason, I didn't lay back down again, right? But whatever. It turns out that where I happened to stop was right in front of a diagnostic clinic in the mall. Synchronicities, right? Now, interestingly, as one of the tests I had to have before my surgery, I had to have an EKG done for the surgery. Well, if you're going to have a heart attack, you want to have an EKG done to make sure that you're not having a heart attack if you think you're having it. And so we went in, we got the EKG done for $20 and no appointment. And they were like, nope, you're not having a heart attack. And they sent us the report for the EKG, which I then could hand over to the new doctor on Wednesday when I came back and had everything ready for him. So, all of this, right? So now I've had bad back, I've had shortness of breath, an asthma attack, I've had a potential heart attack, and this is the first day, right? And now I'm back at the hotel. Now, before we went back to the hotel, my intuition was like, we had talked about getting some games, right? So that we would have some stuff to do at the hotel, or the Airbnb rather, where we were staying. And so I made a point before we left of getting some games. And then we went back and we got into the hot tub. And my back did release. And then I went to get out of the hot tub. And anybody who's been following me on social media knows that I slipped because there was zero slip protection on the stairs that went up to that hot tub. And I slipped and slammed my ankle down and slid my ankle down and bruised the inside of my thigh on the other side because I was one leg in, one leg out, trying to keep myself from going all the way down and sliding my head into the bar on the other side. which I thankfully avoided doing. But I was out of commission for the rest of the trip because that ankle was bad. It is 10 days later, and it is only just now yellowing, right? That bruise is only just now yellowing. I still can't drive, and it still hurts. So I did it bad. And so I'm like, "Oh, okay, wrench." But now here's the thing, okay? What you have to understand is I'm going through all of this in 1 day or 2 days because of the back stuff too, right? So 2 days. And I'm sitting there and I was like, "No, I am not gonna let this back problem keep me from my trip. I will find a way," right? So I followed the synchronicities to my doctor and I got the good pills. Now, the good pills I was on were also helping the injury that I had later, right? Because they were anti-inflammatories and NSAIDs, right? It was a muscle relaxant and an NSAID, right? So I already had the medication in hand for that, right? So that was fine. But then, I'm in pain, right? And my friends are like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And my husband's like, "Yeah," right? And so I could have begun awfulizing at any point during this. Okay. And I will tell you the only anxiety I had was that my friends might be feeling like I was ruining their trip. Right. That was the only anxiety that I had. And, you know, my fr- my friends are amazing. They are bright, shiny, wonderful, happy people, no matter what happens. Right. They're just like water off a duck's back. Nothing phases them, right? To the point where later that trip, the woman of the couple actually tripped at the top of the stairs because the stairs were a misery too. There was a super high stair and a super low stair right next to each other. And she tripped, fell forward, and whacked her head on a table. And actually, I made her go to I was like, "You have to schedule the doctor when you get home," like, because you hit that table pretty hard. And I worked on her within like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of the fall, and put a vertebrae back in place because I could feel that something was out, right? And she got to the doctor, and she said the doctor turned white when he looked at her because she had 2 vertebrae out of place. And if a third one had been out of place, she would have been considered to have broken her neck. Remember, I put one back in. She did break her neck on that trip. And she just shook it off and was like, no problem. I don't know how I did that, blah, blah, blah. If I hadn't said you have to go see the doctor, she probably wouldn't have gone, right? And so, but that's just who she is, right? But the reason that I went and fixed the neck was because I could see her aura turning gray, right? And I was like, "Well, that ain't good. I need to come work on you." Right. So, yeah, I didn't go looking deeper. I found one vertebrae out of place, went, "Oh, okay." And I didn't keep going because, I was just, she pinked up. Her aura pinked up after that. I was like, "Okay, we're all good." Because I wasn't working, right? Anyway, but, these are all the things you went wrong. And then in addition to that, we had, I had a list for the owner of the Airbnb that was 11 items long of the things that were wrong with the unit. I mean, there was no water pressure in the back in the primary bedroom. There was no water pressure. Like, I was in the shower, taking a shower, and it just trickled off to nothing. And there was no hot water when somebody was in the front bathroom. And, I was just like, the door to the bedroom would not close without a pillow up against it, right? It was just, there were so many things that were wrong. I mean, the carpets in this place were filthy. I swear they'd never been vacuumed. And it's just, there was just item after item after item that were problematic in the unit. And we all just looked at it as here's how we would optimize this if we owned this unit, rather than, fuck me, that everything's wrong, right? And that's a very different way of looking at it, right? You could have if I had been in this unit, if I had had this vacation when I was like in my mid-20s, I'd have been a miserable wreck the whole time because I was always looking for what was wrong. And I would have been sitting there going, oh, my back hurts. Take care of me. Now, don't get me wrong, my back hurt a lot. And when we got to the line at customs going into the country, I did, in fact, reach out to one of the people and say, hey, I'm in a lot of pain. Here's a copy of the prescriptions I'm on from my doctor, which I intuitively put in my purse, even though I knew I wouldn't need them to get the prescriptions there because I was bringing them with me. I was like, why do I need this? I'm like, put it in your purse. I'm like, okay. And I handed it to them and they let me go through the handicapped line, the disabled line, and get out the other side so I could sit and wait while my friends went through the regular line and my husband. So, I had managed that. But before that, if I had done this in my 20s, I'd be like, what was me? What was me? I would have whined the whole time in the line. I would not have asked to be allowed to go through the disabled line. I would not have done with that. I would not have done any of that. I would have just let my friends deal with me being a whiny baby. Okay. Now, I will tell you, my default is still whiny baby. We all have our defaults. That is still my default. I will whine about it, but I whine about it differently now. I'm like, it's not a perpetual thing because I would just be miserable the whole time in my 20s. But now I'm like, I just put it away. And then when it shows up, I go, whine. And I do it just like that. I'm like, I'm tired. And then I move on, right? I'm still a whiny baby, but I'm not living in my whininess, right? I'm not living in my misery. I put it away. And then when it shows up, a twinge of pain or whatever, then I'm like, right? And I let it out in that moment and then I'm done with it. So there's a difference between the way that I'm approaching it, right? Now, in the Airbnb, every single thing that was wrong with that Airbnb in my 20s would have just amped me up more and more. I would have been more and more angry. Everything I found wrong would have made me more and more pissed off. I'd have been on the line with that landlord a million times. What about this? And what about that? And I would have spent my entire trip being angry and trying to force them to fix things that, now with age and wisdom and much less in the way of emptiness in my life, right? Because those things are a function of being empty and feeling not seen, right? But all of that would have been, it would have built up, right? And today I was like, okay, I'll put a pillow up against the door. Okay, I'll shower in the hallway bathroom instead of in the main bathroom, right? I will, not look at the carpet. Will not walk on the carpet. Because there's a little rug, right? One whole carpet. It was a area rug, a couple of area rugs. Okay, I'll just do this or that or the other thing, right? No big deal. And instead of trying to control my environment, I controlled myself. And thus, I didn't have to get angry. Okay? Was I not happy? Would I never book that again? Yeah. Was not happy. In fact, this morning I actually reached out and I was like, okay, dude, I gave you the opportunity to give me a refund of your own accord and you didn't. But here's all the things that have occurred after the fact. I didn't get to perform in the show that I'd been rehearsing for months. I still can't drive my car because it's a stick shift and I can't push the clutch. This whole list of things that are still problematic, right? I had to push back my surgery by a week so I could do the exercises necessary to get the best outcome. And, all of this stuff is going on. And I'm like, I would like a refund. I did that this morning. I was like, I really think a refund's in order, and and my friend broke her neck. So, all these things. So we'll see what he says. But either way, I'm not going to be angry, right? Because I had to ask because that's taking care of myself and defending myself, right? Your inner child needs to know that you're defending them, that you're standing up for them, right? My inner child was injured, right? Now, but this was a gift to me. So let me explain to you why this whole thing was a gift, because I didn't get to do anything on the trip. My friends went out and they did. My husband didn't get to do anything either because he decided to stay home with me to take care of me. And so our friends went out and they did all the things that they wanted to do, which I was glad that they did, because then I didn't have to feel bad about ruining their trip too. But they went out and did everything that they wanted to do, and they came back with pictures, which was lovely, and a story, which was lovely. So we got to share vicariously, right? And then we stayed in and played games, and we had a good time with the time we had. We had to buy a lot of more Ubers. We had to buy a bunch of medical equipment, like a cane and some bandages and compression socks and, a bunch of stuff. My husband had to go out and spend a bunch of money to make sure I could make it through the rest of the trip. I had to spend an hour and a half on the phone with Copa Airlines to get my wheelchair for the trip back, because there was no way I was going to be able to walk through the airports. All of this, right? So, but this was a gift. And why was it a gift?
I hate when you say it's a gift. This is my least favorite shamanic lesson. Tell us why it's a gift, Kelly. Please, the good people want to know how all of this was a gift.
I know, right? I realized, so one of the things that happened on the trip was I had paid extra for, now, so here's two lessons here, okay? First thing was I bought the cheap tickets that were on sale at the time that I bought them. And then I went, oh, it's our anniversary, because it's only an hour and a half flight. I'm like, I can fly in hoi polloi in the cheap seats for an hour and a half for each flight. That's not a big deal. If by the time you're up, you're coming back down, it's not a problem. But I said, well, how about I just get us front row of that as a upgrade, right? And I was like, okay. And so I did that. And then a few months later, after I'd paid for those seats, I called Copa back and said, you know what? It's really only another that much again to upgrade to business class. I'm like, how about I upgrade to business class? And they said, well, it won't be just that much. You lose the seats that you bought and you don't get a credit for that. I'm like, on what planet does that make sense? Right? I swear to God, Copa loses a ton of money, because this is not the first time I've had something where I wanted to pay them more money and they wouldn't let me upgrade. And so, I was just like, oh, that just whatever. And so I was so soured by that when they have this thing where you can bid on seats and stuff like that. If they don't fill business class, they give you discounted price to bid on seats. And I was so upset that they had been like so ridiculous about it that I didn't bid on them. And so what happened was, as everybody was coming on board the plane, I got bashed in the head, bashed in the shoulder, bashed with bags. And I was feeling very, very unseen in my pain on our trip back, right? Because I'm sitting there desperately afraid somebody's going to hit my leg, and all because I'm in the front seats, the flight attendants are walking by and they step in right where I am, and I'm like, don't step on me. I just like the whole first flight, I was just like flipping out because nobody saw my pain, right? Even though I even learned the words to be able to say in Spanish that I was injured, right? And do I remember them now? God, no. But so but I'm triggered as fuck, man. I'm so triggered. Thank God a friend of mine gifted me with a handkerchief, because I burst into tears once that flight was off the ground, and I did not stop crying the entire flight. I just melted down, and I wasn't loud. I didn't make a big scene. I just quietly cried in my seat, It wasn't a beg for attention. It was a release of all of the trauma that had happened over the course of the trip and before, right? And my husband, bless him. Oh, my husband is my rock. I swear to God, this man is amazing. he looked at me on the next flight and he said, "How about we board last?" And I was like, "What a brilliant idea," because I had wheelchair service and I could sit my butt at that gate until every last person was on board. And that's what I did. And that was a much better flight and a much better experience. And so, but in the course of the triggering, I realized, so my core wound has always been not important, right? And that just is a function of my childhood. And that's, between my mother choosing alcohol over me, which I now understand is a disease and, whatever. But as a child, she was choosing alcohol over me. And my father leaving and getting a new family and choosing them over me, right? Out of all of that, I had all of this non-important stuff going on in my life. And I didn't realize that there was still this piece in there. I couldn't figure out why for years I lived in Boston, which is the medical mecca of the US, and I got shitty healthcare everywhere I went. And it's like, why am I getting shitty healthcare in the medical mecca, right? And everybody else would get good healthcare and I would get shitty healthcare. But it was because I still had this story that says my pain goes unseen. And that came from my mom being a nurse. Anybody out there whose mother is a nurse knows that other people's mothers give you kisses for your boo-boos. And nurses give you, yeah, whatever. Get over here, I'll slap a Band-Aid on it. My mother, anytime something hurt, her default response was bring it over, I'll cut it off. Absolutely zero compassion or sympathy for any pain whatsoever. And when I was in 7th grade and I threw my back out and needed 6 months of physical therapy because I had scoliosis and I was doing cross-country running, which evidently those two don't go together. My mother, who had had back problems her whole life, and I should have caught this, but I didn't until just now as I'm telling the story, the back problem before I started the trip, right? That was the indicator for what the issue was about, right? My mother spent the entirety of those 6 months saying, "Oh, just stop. You're just trying to be like me. This is not how you should be like me. Just stop. You're just being dramatic." Had some physical therapy, screaming in pain when they came at me with the TENS machine and things like that. No, I'm just being dramatic, right? So there was this story that my pain went unseen. And I got an opportunity to look at that back in, I don't know, like 3-4 months ago when I slipped and fell and hit my knee and couldn't move for 6 weeks, right? Where all my friends came together and they all rallied and they all helped. And it was all I had to do was say, I need this, I need that. They were like, we got it. We're on you. No problem. We're there. And so I got to rewrite the story, but I didn't unwind the story. Right. And so I had to do this to unwind the story, to recognize that this was a thing that was deep inside of me. And to recognize that 1, I could advocate for myself. 2, I had a husband and friends who did acknowledge and see my pain and adjust for it with no complaint, right? And that I was taken care of, that I could be taken care of in the journey. And so it was a massive gift that I got to undo this story, right? And so I come back to the experience, right? So this has been a long story, guys, but I needed to tell you all the pieces, right? I would go to a restaurant and find out it was on the 2nd or 3rd floor and I had to walk up the stairs, right? Things like that. These things happened in the trip. And so we started calling the restaurant in advance saying, are you on the 1st floor? Learn, live and learn, right? So, all of these things go into play. And so when you're looking at how you have your experiences, right? I could have been getting more and more frustrated as time went on. I could have been doing, getting myself going into my victim is really what I'm trying to say. I could have been going into my victim, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed focused on having a good time. Did I have the occasional thought running through my head of woe is me? Yeah, I did. The occasional thought. And then I went, I'm not investing in that reality. I'm investing in having a good time on this trip. And I had a great time on the trip. My friends helped a lot. We picked the perfect people to go on this trip with us because their attitude was infectious. And it was really helpful for me in my state to be able to do it. And, we just need to pay attention to what's going on inside of us. I was aware on the plane that I was triggered. I was aware that I was, it took me a while. I spent the entirety of that flight trying to figure out what was triggering me because I haven't been triggered that hard in a long time. It's a long time. And I was like, ooh, this one's deep and this one's wide and this one's like, I was finding myself being overly dramatic as I walked to the bathroom, leaning on the seats harder than I needed to, And don't get me wrong, I needed to lean on the seats, but I didn't need to limp pathetically. And I was limping pathetically. I'm like, okay, that's very interesting. My inner child is having fun with this one. What's going on here, right? And just being aware, right? And so, this is how you notice. Right? This is how you notice. You're like, oh, wow, I'm being dramatic here. Okay. Why? Why am I feeling this need to be dramatic, to be noticed, to be whatever? Oh, this is why. Right? Yes. You unmuted. You have something to say.
Hi. No, I remember talking with you after the trip and unwinding the story a little bit, but no, I just thought it was beautiful. I'm, in my friend's shop here. And as you got to the culminating crescendo of this lesson, this beautiful little music box in here just started playing itself. And I must tell you, this is why I was on mute. That is why I muted. But I just thought that was absolutely perfect because I have no idea why that would just go off. But we do.
I was wondering why you were looking distracted at the crescendo of my story.
Well, you're like
story because they talked about it, but yeah.
We're psychics. Weird shit happens. I'm like, who's speaking to me now? Like, what? Who are you and where's my horse? So I never, I know it looks insane to most people, but I'm like, is that in this life or is this another dimension? You know how it goes. I'm like, I'm on a podcast trying to be very actively listening. And I'm like, that's absolutely happening somewhere here. But would you call that a clue by four?
Oh, that was definitely a clue by four to the forehead. Yeah. I haven't gotten one of those in decades, but yes.
Yeah. I'm so glad to see you on the other side of it. And, I think, you talking about, your relationship with your mother and how it came from there. I think, and it just shows that these pieces of work we do are layered, there's always a little something underneath it sometimes and it comes up, but I think right now as you're, revamping a lot of things in your life, all of these things coming up right now is, the perfect timing, for everything to, if you're looking to move things out so new things can move in, this is the way it happens sometimes on this path. But it is a gift. I just want to say that Kelle has told me that pain is a gift multiple times, and every time I know she's right, and I look at her in disgust. Nonetheless, because and but that lesson has served me well over the course of the last 9 months. Like because that pain, if you get stuck in the victim of it, is one of the deepest ways I've bled my energy over and over and over again, because the victim is anger and the victim is I'm not good enough and all the same, like as I was listening to your story, I was like, yeah, definitely one of the stories I've been unwinding this year. And I was compartmentalizing that in case there's a deeper layer down the road. I'm like, remember this is important.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I was going to reference the episode we did on the victim in the misery box. And that's the piece, right? You can choose to be in your victim or you can choose not to be. And, wherever you choose is wherever you end up. And, the victim is not a happy place to be. So, choose wisely, young Jedi, right? So,
absolutely.
And speaking of which, I think this is a great time to finish up. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And remember that what you focus on expands. What you intend is what you create. So choose wisely. Have a great one.